Hello, and welcome to this panel discussion for the launch of EIES, the European Initiative for Energy Security. I'm Albéric Mongrenier, EIES' new Executive Director and new moderator today. So thanks a lot for joining us. Feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we'll try to address as many as possible at the end of the discussion. Today, I'm joined by an eminent panel of speakers, starting with Mr. Maros Šefčovič, Executive Vice President for the European Green Deal, Ambassador Reka Semerkeni, former ambassador of Hungary to the United States, and Ambassador Andris Piebalgs, former European Commissioner for Energy, among other things. Before we start our discussion, a few words about EIES and the recommendations from our launch paper, which you'll find on our website and which may have reached your inboxes already. So we're an organization that brings together policymakers, former military and business leaders that advocate to replace energy security at the core of energy policy across Europe. COVID, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, tight energy supply, and a high dependency on China for the raw materials and clean technology that are necessary for the transition have exposed our dependencies and vulnerabilities over the past couple of years. We've moved as Europeans to tackle these over the past 2 years, and we believe that we must accelerate in order for us to be able to best navigate what we call the mid-transition, so the next few years, and to ensure long-term European prosperity. So as an organization, we'll aim to bring together business, policymakers, and other actors, of course, to develop policies that are aimed at de-risking Europe's energy transition and to deliver concrete benefits to all Europeans. This with the support of our senior leadership council, of which Ambassadors Semerkeni and Ambassador Piebalgs are part of. A couple of words about our key recommendations that are found in the paper. These are for policymakers in and outside the EU across Europe. They include the prioritization of a joint whole supply chain energy security strategy, the fast-track development of domestic raw materials materials and processing, as well as clean tech manufacturing in Europe, the expansion and further integration of all forms of dispatchable low-carbon energy sources, as well as the associated energy infrastructure to complement intermittent renewable energy sources. The development of strong national, but also regional energy and industrial plans coordinated and supported by European institutions, and sufficient funding, obviously public and private, to develop them. The construction of a global club with like-minded countries around the themes of supply chains for raw materials and tech. And to conclude, the promotion of radical supply chains transparency, high standards, and we need to be ready to use defensive trade tools to counter anti-competitive and anti-democratic behavior where it emerges. So more on this in our paper, of course, but I'll move us on now to the panel, starting with Mr. Šefčovič, European Vice President for the European Green Deal. Mr. Šefčovič, I believe our recommendations echo some of the work that the European Commission and European member states have been doing over the past couple of years. So to name a few, the Economic Security Strategy, the Net Zero Industry Act, Critical Materials Act, Battery Alliance, Grids Package, etc. 2023 was definitely a year of coordinated action in the face of rising challenges. What would you say has been achieved, and what are the main challenges waiting for us for Europe in 2024?
Thank you very much, Albéric, for the invitation, and of course it's a great pleasure to be in the panel with my very good friend and former colleague Andris Piebalgs, but also with Madam Ambassador Reka Semerkeni. And I'm just talking to you now from Brussels, where there's a lot of police cars, because we have probably the most important European Council, most important summit this year, because we are going to discuss the future of Ukraine, the biggest enlargement package since, I would say, our wave of enlargement, when Andris and I became the citizens of European Union, because our countries made it in. And of course, very important issues linked with the budget and with, I would say, adjusting our financial instruments to the current realities and challenges, which are kind of multiplied over the last 2 years from COVID to the war of Ukraine, high energy prices, inflation, and I would say these geopolitical tensions also further aggravated by the terrible events unfolding in the Middle East. So with all this, I would say that we are clearly in the middle of a very important decade for Europe. I can say it could be kind of make it or break it period from the perspective where the Europe will be in 5 to 10 years. Of course, my top priority is that we have to remain to be a global actor. We have to be one of the top 3 European then world economies and world powers, and we have to adjust our actions in that direction. So I would see very briefly like 5 main, action points. One, which is very closely linked with the result of COP28 of yesterday, which with all European modesty, I would say, would not have happened without decisive action of Team Europe, I mean, European institutions and European member states to unblock loss of damage fund, to make sure that we'll push for tripling of production of renewables, doubling the energy efficiency, for making sure that we'll be insisting on a very key element, which is now translated into the final text, is transitioning away from the fossil fuels with very clear language on the fossil subsidies. And that, I think, in the end is also framing the priorities for us, which means that we have to accelerate the decarbonization of our economy to reduce the dependency on fossil imports. We know how much we are paying for being overly dependent on Russia, how much we paid the last year, how difficult it is still this year, and how difficult it will be next year. And then, of course, we have also to make sure that we will use all the low carbon sources of energy we have at our disposal. So we see kind of renaissance of the nuclear power, and we see how much money we need to invest in energy efficiency and further boosting not only on production of renewables, but also into the upgrade of grids, so this energy produced by the renewables can actually be transported where you need it from the perspective of the consumers. So clearly, very, very collaborative approach between the industry, between the member states, regulators, and citizens and business leaders would be needed. Second, I would say very important priority, especially if we want to remain one of the top 3 world economies, is competitiveness of our economy. And I think it's coming more to the forefront, especially when we see the IRA policies in US, the subsidies coming from China, and we have to really look how to deal with these challenges. And we have even further to reinforce the industrial dimension of the European Green Deal. We need to develop even stronger business case for clean tech and green tech in Europe. And then, of course, the major challenge is high energy prices. We have to adjust the public procurement processes in Europe, making sure that those companies which are sustainable, which have low carbon footprint, are treating their workers decently, that they should be awarded and rewarded for their work and not penalized by buying the products from somewhere else, where the only common, I would say, criterion for the purchase is that the price is lower. We simply cannot overlook anymore where the products are coming from, how they've been manufactured, and what kind of carbon footprint they have. So we kind of introduce this criterion into our battery regulation, into our wind package, and I think that we will have to elaborate more how to use this competitive sustainability criterion in the future, and how to use also trade defense mechanisms if needed, as we demonstrated with our examination of the subsidies for electric vehicles imports from China. Third big topic of today, enlargement. Of course, Ukraine, that's a huge challenge, and it would be, of course, a huge contribution to the European unity. We still have Western Balkan countries. We have Moldova. We have Georgia. There is enormous, I would say, momentum there, enormous interest. I'm sitting with Europe ministers in General Affairs Council already for probably more than 10 years. And I can tell you that never the topic of enlargement was so present in our discussion as it is right now. But of course, it also requires that our institutions also internally would be prepared and that we would adjust the enlargement process into the way that also the economies and the systems in these countries would be able to cope with the single market and with the expectations we have in the EU. Fourth, how to deal with China. Clearly, we need to recalibrate our global affairs and relations with China. As you know, this is a Herculean task. We just had the EU-China summit. We see China as a potential competitor, systemic rival, but also potential partner. As we see, we would need the China to use their foreign policy influence, be it in the Middle East, but potentially even the conflict in Ukraine. We know how instrumental the cooperation with them was even at COP28, and at the same time, we also see that they are ready to use the excessive economic capacities for, let's say, using it to their economic advantage. We see the way how they've been working with the countries in Africa and Asia for capturing as much as possible of critical raw materials. We see, you know, how they use the Belt and Road policy in a way which is kind of locking in the potential partners into the long term. It's not always the most financially advantageous relationship, and therefore we are coming with our global gateway approach, where we show that we want to do it differently. We are ready to work with the countries in the third world in a way that let's work on value added created in your countries, creating new jobs, but at the same time sharing the result of our common work, especially if it comes to the critical raw materials part. And the last point I would make is our relationship with the United States of America. I mean, these days we see that it's absolutely crucial from the geopolitical and security point of view. I have to say that if you look at the last 10 years, the world of the traditional Western values is getting smaller. If you look at the democracy index, we have more countries and more people living now under autocratic than democratic regimes. And I think these should be very clear signals for us that we have to stick together much more than before. And therefore, I'm a big proponent or supporter of the idea that we should create like a transatlantic free marketplace for clean tech and green tech. If we cannot have a full FTA because of the agriculture, I think we should focus on what is clearly the future of our economies. This is clean tech, green tech, future-oriented technologies, and let's use this huge potential of US and EU market for scaling up, for investing in research and innovation, because it would help both of our economies, but at the same time, we will do the service to the third world, which wants to jump over this carbon age, but without the technologies and the technologies at the affordable prices, they will not be able to do that. So I think that would be in our interest, and I know that this is a very difficult discussion, but I'm strongly convinced that we should focus on how to build bridges over Atlantic and not obstacles to our economic cooperation. And IRA in particular is creating a lot of tension on European market, and therefore I hope that we'll continue our discussions with our American friends on this issue. How can we address some of the consequences for European economy? So I would stop here because I know that our time is very, very precious.
Thank you very much, Mr. Šefčovič, and you know, very, very good to hear that your agenda largely aligns on ours, and a very good point also on the need to make progress on trade deals around specific technologies, if and when we cannot make progress fast enough on broader trade deals. Moving on to our next speakers, I've got lots of follow-up questions, but I'll come back to it, especially on the ongoing European Council. Going to Ambassador Semerkeni. My question to you will be, based on what Mr. Šefčovič said, defending shared democracy and pro-market value is contingent on collective buy-in to upholding standards across Europe and with global partners. Can you talk to us about some of the upcoming challenges and lessons from the war in Ukraine for European countries and European security as we move forward?
Thank you, Alberic, for putting this panel together, and thank you for this great discussion. I'm really honored to be here with Maroš Šefčovič and Andris Spivaks, who I think are the top thought leaders on energy security of Europe for the defining decades that are going to set the track for the next for the future of our continent and the transatlantic community. So yeah, of course, I think this is a very, very important question to understand how common values rooted in democracy and rooted in those freedoms that inspire our nations and our histories define our future as well. So I believe that what we have seen as a result of the aggressive Russian attack against Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine is a very interesting and very important lesson for history as well. On one hand, we can see a very stronger than ever before collective buy-in to upholding these values and to sticking together, which is completely contrary to what had been predicted by most of the analyses made in Moscow, I'm sure, before the decision to invade was made. At the same time, obviously, nothing goes without discussions and debates. And because these are so strategic pressures, I think these debates should not be underestimated. And I very much agree that this is really a moment in which we have to rethink, all the previous concerns and previous obstacles to be able to underline even further the importance of the values that have been drawing us together in the past, 3 decades. And in reality, I think, there have been, two main driving forces for energy policy thinking in the European context since 1990. One was this very massive shift of prioritizing to what is now called the green transition and for clean technologies. But the other driver of energy policy thinking and decision making in Europe was a reliance on cheap Russian energy supplies, reliable as they were seen and cheap. I think none of these are true. Obviously, we have seen that they are not reliable, but I think we also have to understand that there is a myth that these Russian energy sources were cheaper than the ones available on the market, because obviously for the way they had been calculated, the subsidies, the lack of incorporating all the cost of upstream developments or the cost of transition, a lot of additional costs were hidden from these prices. But ultimately, the European public opinion was convinced of the cheapness and the availability and reliability of these sources. I think what we're seeing now is what is common in these drivers is really that both of these push towards a very interesting position in our thinking, which is a very strategically healthy decision making. Because both the idea of understanding, that our green transition process, that what we have seen over the last decade is being, the driver in global thinking also. I think it is a very important element of understanding the importance of, thinking Europe. But secondly, the understanding that, yes, no security and no green transition is possible without the strategic decoupling and delinking of the European economies from the myths or the idea of a cheap energy supply available. I think it's very important. And yes, there's a price to it at the beginning, but I believe it is pushing us into a strategically much healthier situation. I often see that this there's a false narrative that have appeared obviously over the last year and a half since we have seen Russia's aggression against Ukraine, which is the narrative of, well, what's the big difference? We're by turning away from Russian imports, Europe is really just replacing one dependency with another, and that is no big change. I would say it's the funniest notion if it was not misleading and uninsightful, because it is there's a totally, strategic difference between being dependent, obviously, on an adversary or state actor of a malign influence, and of being, increasingly dependent on a partner and ally. And I think there's a big strategic difference in consequences as well. But I'm happy to come back to this later and not to take more of the time. I think it is fundamentally a huge priority for us to go forward to support Marush's comments on really focusing on the bringing in of the common free trade thinking into the transatlantic arena, and prioritizing, of course, clean technologies and the green energy transition, I think, is a wonderful way to go forward, and one that will enhance Europe's competitiveness in the long term as well.
Thank you. You make a very good point about a cheap Russian gas, which obviously is no longer available and has an impact on energy prices across Europe, which is what is actually putting pressure on European citizens at the moment. Which leads me to my next question to Ambassador Peebles about. So you've been, at the helm and following European energy policy very, very closely, based on your past experience and based on what you're seeing right now. What are the biggest challenges that Europe's energy sector may be facing over the next 5 to 10 years, that it moves towards a cleaner, more domestic also energy system, and the expansion of the associated infrastructure also that is much necessary to better interconnect European countries? You're on mute, sorry.
So Europe has gone through a rather steep curve of learning how to deal with energy security issues. And if you look forward, these challenges are not less, but more. We need to anticipate the risks that are related with completely different energy systems that we will have in the years ahead. And at the same time, we know that when you are in transition, the risks are even more stronger, because replacing one system with another, you need some safety margin. So you have a really situation that Europe has never experienced. So that is very clear. We know the transition goes in electrification, renewable energy sources, there is CCS, there are issues that relate also a lot with classical security of supply issues, physical protection of infrastructure, then cybersecurity. We have in place systems about that regulates how to keep safety of electricity supply. I believe that these systems basically are in place. The risk is that in transition periods, the disagreement between member countries how to apply these regulations could be challenging. So we need to improve even these systems, that they are more streamlined, more faster to respond when risks are coming. Saying said this, we have new responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities is really to innovate fast, to come with new technologies that strengthen diversity in EU, and at the same time respond to the risks. One is, well, you've already mentioned nuclear technologies. Nuclear is going through new curve. Small modular reactors are advancing. There are also some developments on nuclear fusion. So we need to be very careful not to miss opportunity when it could be launched very quickly and take away the barriers that could be in the internal market. Second issue is the storage. We know that we are dependent from lithium, but at the same time, there are new technologies like Energy Dome that does not use lithium, and it's Europe-based technologies that is already proven on megawatt scale. So I believe that we need really to check these new technologies that strengthen our strategic security and try to scale them up as Commission is doing now with action plan on grids, action plan on wind energy, because they are moving. But from security of supply point of view, you need to make actions faster. And then there are supply chains. Executive Vice President Shevchovich mentions that it is competitivity, but at the same time, there is also some responsibility. For example, for strategical raw materials, for some, perhaps we need to start thinking about stocks. There are things that we have learned from the previous times, and we need really to deploy in new situation very wise, but at the same time to provide the security margin. Because what is expectation in Europe, and in a way, success to address energy challenges sometimes plays against security of supply. There is perception that energy supply for all the services is guaranteed 24/7. And that's somehow times take away political attention, because for security of supply, you need to pay. There are costs. There are costs in anticipation, providing safety margins. And this, I believe, is a European initiative for energy security, needs really to identify and to put forward to help the visionary politicians that are ready to deploy these mechanisms, really to support them. Because Maros said what I fully endorse with US, but if he would go to EU member countries, well, there would be a lot of different opinions as well. So it is something that politicians with vision need to be supported, and EIES, I believe, is a very good mechanism really to promote it, helping to anticipate and making Europe and the world stronger in the face of new threats.
Thank you very much, Mr. Peebles, and you're making my transition to the panel discussion and my first question actually very easy. You make a very good point about the difficulty of uniting European countries and reconciling different views. We hear a lot about dissension and different opinions. I mean, we've seen a lot of. Europe has acted quite with a strong solidarity in the face of the Ukraine challenge, even though we always see differences, but there is in the face of shared challenges, possibilities to move forward. So I'd like to open the broader discussion with a question to Mr. Šefčovič, who mentioned earlier that there's an ongoing EU Council, and obviously there's the recent EU-China summit that we can draw lessons from. How do you think we can best reconcile different approaches and priorities across Brussels and national capitals to ensure ambition and commitment to our energy security and energy transition project going forward, and in the face of we have to say strong headwinds?
Thank you very much for very inspiring, also introductory remarks by my colleagues in the panel, but also for your question. Indeed, I mean, over the last few years, we lived through sometimes I would say too much history, and usually what is such a common wisdom in Europe that I think it's a kind of a bit of a quote of the founding fathers, that Europe will be forged through crises. And I think we had quite a generous, to be a little bit ironic, of a lot of crises in Europe over the last few years. And I have to say that to a great extent that they really also forged the new way of cooperation. I think we learned from the financial crisis by creating the next generation EU. We didn't want to be plunged into the austerity after the COVID-19 crisis. Then, of course, what we have seen was remarkable unity of the EU member states, not only vis-a-vis Brexit, but especially and even more importantly, when the war in Ukraine has started, where you saw that European leaders, but also European public, was very much united on how to respond, and they had huge expectations from European level. I'm not speaking only about the EU institutions, but I'm talking about the European coordination and cooperation. Therefore, the European Council's meetings are now so frequent. I remember in my heydays of PermRep to the EU, we had like summit every 3-4 months. Now we have it almost every month because it's important. I mean, you need simply the leaders to be in permanent contact, to work out all these differences, because the Europe is always very, very strong if we are united, if we have a consensus around the major political issues, which is very difficult to achieve sometimes. And I mean, we will have some of such a crucial discussions also this evening and tomorrow morning. And I think that the same approach and close coordination would be needed also for the years to come. We had the 24th EU-China summit just a couple of days ago, and I think quite clearly the European leaders been putting on the table the issues which are on the table for quite some time. 400 billion euros of trade deficit, very difficult environment for the European companies to be in China, a restriction if it comes to public procurement, non-accessibility to research and innovation funds, and of course not transparent way of subsidies and use of excessive capacities for all kinds of products which are now being kind of channeled towards Europe, because America has been kind of gradually closing up the doors for the Chinese products in US. I mean, the discussions as usual also been okay, with some kind of hopeful vision for the future, but we know that this would be permanently very, very challenging issue on the table, because we see that China is talking much more and acting much more in the area of security of control, not only in military but also in economic. They're projecting power to the region, but I would say also on the global stage. And now we see that the security of supply, security of controls becomes kind of new imperative. If you look at the decision makings, not only in China but also in US, we have export controls, we have foreign subsidy controls, and we do the same in the European Union. So I would say this type of globalization, of smooth working global supply chains, I think it will not come back to that level as we have seen it 5 years ago for quite some times, if ever in the future. And then we see that there is also a systemic challenge that again, if I'm talking about the situation a couple of years ago, some of the schemes which are now so heavily deployed, be it in US or be it in China, would be immediately challenged in the WTO. You can do it also now, but what would be the results when we do not have the appeal bodies functioning? And therefore the question is also for us in Europe how to adjust to the situation, because we are biggest promoter for the free and fair trade, for the international trade based on rules, respect for multilateral organizations, and so on and so forth. But we see that the world which was there and which was so important for well-functioning, I would say, global supply chains, and I would say this globalization period of world economy, that this is changing quite significantly, and therefore I think that what would be also very important for us in European Union to have very clear understanding of our priorities. I think that we'll have to be very clear what we want to accomplish, how we want to modernize European economy. Clearly, we are going for decarbonization, for clean tech, green tech, for sustainability. Clearly, we have to see how in this very tough geoeconomic and geopolitical world we can consolidate and strengthen the business case for the investors for these technologies. We have to have much stronger economic security. Now I'm talking about supply of energy, about supply of critical raw materials, but also about supplies of critical technologies. And I think Andris, he highlighted it very, very correctly. We have to use much more the the size and the weight of European market for common purchases, as we did it with vaccines. Now we're doing it with the gas, and I'm absolutely convinced we have to go for hydrogen. We have to go for critical raw materials. We have to be very clear for what we need strategic stockpiles. What are the products? What are the key ingredients for the economy we need to have, or in Europe or close to us? And of course, we have to be also very or more smart than we've been in the past if it comes to supply of key materials like critical raw materials, which are getting from the third countries. Not only to have contracts, but my preference always would be to be in the board, to be the shareholders, because then they really have to treat they have to treat your contract with much bigger respect. And all kinds of references which we see, especially in the time of crisis. This was kind of this Meyer case. I mean, simply would not be so easily deployed as we have seen in the past. So I think we have to very much focus on how we want to put our house in order, how to be more competitive, better organized, how to have our clear priorities set for ourselves, and look for the balanced, fair relationship. And I would say as close as possible with our key allies and partner, how United States of America, and therefore I would go for any type of, let's say, tighter economic relationship, especially in this areas of the future, because they will be decisive for the competitive edge and for the position of European economy and American economy in the world. We are not going to compete about who is better in diesel cars. We are going to compete who can store more energy, who is more efficient in transporting, who can store it, who can lower the carbon footprint faster, who can deploy more energy efficient technologies. I mean, this would be not speaking about, of course, the whole digital world and artificial intelligence and everything which comes with it. So this is where the competition in this century would take place. And therefore, I think that such two big economies like US and EU, I mean, we have to look for the ways what we can do closer together, and look for as fair as possible partner type of a relationship with China. You know, we say that we do not want to decouple, we want to de-risk, meaning for us the risking means diversified options for supply of the products we need to Europe to avoid the steep price we are paying for dependencies which have been built over the years with Russia, be it in fossil fuels or some of the critical raw materials. So this would be, I would say, the few suggestions I would make. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. You covered a lot of ground, but very valid, especially for the next 5 to 10 years, where careful planning and execution, and not just within the EU, but also with other allies across the continent and across the world, will be very important. Going back to Ambassador Semerkeni, like similar question to you. Building on your experience as a European diplomat, how to reconcile different approaches, and what do you think is the place of and the role of the EU in the world today as a custodian of the multilateral rules-based order and driver of the energy transition?
Thank you so much for the question as well, because I think this is something that is so much in the heart of many of the Europeans themselves, which is the way they see themselves in the world. And I believe it is a motivating force that inspires generations, and it has inspired generations in Europe. One of the most important thing I think that we have to focus on is really to relaunch a very strong and very deep strategic dialogue and discussion inside Europe about the real strategic challenges, and in the transatlantic framework. I think it is a big priority to refocus of our understanding of global challenges, so that we can see that our threat perceptions do not diverge to a level that is not manageable. So the common values and the common roots of the continents working together are the driving forces in this. And I think adding on, which I believe, we have to develop those channels of dialogue and those channels of exchange in which we can refocus on the differences among the various, national backgrounds and historic understandings and historic roots, and the common values and the common interests in the long term that bind us together. This dialogue is a completely, big priority for being able to develop common solutions for the long term. And if I may say just one sentence on what this really means, for instance, I think in reality, for the two big challenges that we see on the horizon, Russia and China, or that we are facing now, I think in one kind of very clear way, we have understood that Russia, because of the security threat that it means for the continent, is really a challenge that Europeans cannot really manage and solve without the United States. We need a transatlantic cooperation for that. But China, with the same way, is a security challenge in which the US will not be able to solve it without the cooperation with its partners, allies in the transatlantic community and beyond. So I think we're in a situation in which in history, in which it is very clear that the transatlantic cooperation and the transatlantic common values have a very special role for building the stability for the future.
Thank you. And Ambassador Peebles, I see you opinating. I think you're actually joining us from a neighbor, an EU neighbor today. What else can you add about European cooperation with women internally, but also with the neighbors and allies?
No, I think we have we have plenty of risk, and Ambassador Shemerkani said, well, we really need to have the political strategy and also close relations with transatlantic. And we have seen that sometimes the perceptions are very different. And as Executive Vice President said, as today and tomorrow perhaps is really the day that perhaps will not destroy everything, but where we have so much at stake that I just hope that everything will go exactly as it should go. So let's hope that it will happen. Saying said this, whatever system you build, at the end of the day, there is a political decision making that is crucial. And for me, I believe that Europe, it has difficulties, but also some strengths. I have recently discussed energy issues with some big companies, and one of big member countries have basically bad news. I said, are there any good news? And the good news, I said, well, in Europe we have agreed on this and on that. So that means that one of the important precondition for European energy security is definitely strong and efficient European institutions. And if it is going like this, and Maros mentioned a couple of examples, that I think is the key for security of supply. We have well-functioning common market. We have many skilled people in the market, but the political decision-making sometimes need to go out of the box. And you rightly mentioned, I am today in a country that, well, not many Europeans would recognize with energy security. It is Oman. Oman has made a decision and implements very fast in a year time to be one of the big suppliers of renewable hydrogen. There are a couple of things that still need to be dealt with, but they are definitely building very credible supply chain. Now the point is offtake. And offtake in Europe is definitely the most stable in perspective. But to facilitate it, perhaps we would need use this facility, something similar like gas purchasing platform, because coming of having a supply from Oman diversifies. It's definitely not the only supplier, but that is promising because it's a new guy on the blocks to supply Europe with energy resources. So I mean that whenever you have issues, You need to look for the solutions that are fast, credible, and deliver additional safety margin. So I think that's what is need to be organized and looked upon, not just get upset with some failures or get overexcited about some successes, just to be consistent. And I think in European thinking, we need to get it, but it is more political thinking than technological thinking. We are by far more stronger and by far more respected as we think in the world. That is very clear since I left office. It's obvious. But at the same time, we try always the time shooting our own leg. And that is a difficulty. So, and I believe the good discussions and keeping security of supply very high on political agenda is a key really to deliver this security agenda, because technically we will deliver. Politically, there is a challenge because, well, as soon you are satisfied, you don't do anything. And here is permanent risk is there. So I believe we need to very much focus on this, support politically to keep this issue very high on agenda and to see where we have risks and where we have solutions for that minimize these risks.
Thank you very much. And so based on this, staying with you, Ambassador Peebles, what would you say are the top, three, four energy security priorities for Europe for next year, for 2024?
Let's say my wish list. So I would say, first of all, to have a more efficient governance regulation. Governance regulation has been adopted in very peaceful time. So we need by far more efficient as this one. Then second, I would wish more opportunities for European Commission really to strengthen energy innovation projects, like I mentioned, this storage projects, that there is a financial and operational means really to scale up. And third, definitely to find the ways how to implement the Critical Raw Material Act. So I believe that is a third priority. It describes very nicely, but implementation could be challenged if we keep the system as it is now.
Yeah, and on the Critical Raw Materials Act implementation, I actually have a question from the audience to Mr. Šefčovič on the implementation of the act. How optimistic are you on its implementation fast enough across member states, specifically on the need to move to reduce permitting times? So that's a question from Vitor Correa. And actually, there's a link question that is coming from Batu Kutelia, who is asking if there's a strategy also along this act to bring along critical raw materials from Central Asia, so from our neighbors in Central Asia and the Caucasus.
Thank you very much also for this question, and they are quite related. But I will just give quick reaction to one of the wish of Andris. Indeed, we are currently working on the new governance regulation, which would be fit for 2030, and it should cover, I would say, better management of national energy and climate plans. And I hope that it will help us to, let's say, do this more efficiently and with a better results. But coming to the Critical Raw Materials and Critical Raw Materials Act, I think that the fact that this was act which was drafted and approved by co-legislators in an express manner, I mean, it's I would say very impressive what the co-legislator did with our proposals, and how quickly this was approved just shows that everybody is fully aware of the urgency of the matter. So to tell you where we are and what are the next steps, so we are going to work very quickly on a so-called list of strategic European projects. I mean, to kind of describe it on a more practical, in more practical terms. I mean, many of you would remember, and Andris for sure would remember, that we have the same system for so-called project of the common interest, the PCIs, where we kind of clearly described what kind of interconnectors are missing when we have a low capacity, where we do not have the LNG terminals, and we kind of made the list of the most important projects. we gave them the status of the PCI, and then we've been working together with the member states, with the Commission, with our financial institutions, how to help them with the fast permitting and the funding. So I mean, it's something similar what we want to do here with critical raw materials. So we are preparing this list of the strategic European projects. So we had already quite extensive discussions with different project promoters. So I think that now we have an idea what we might have here in Europe. And we have quite a lot what we have in our neighborhood, Western Balkans, and then we of course are also having extensive discussions with our friends. I personally was signing the MOU on critical raw materials with Ukraine, which I hope once the peace is restored, that it could be really critical raw material superpower, because I think they have everything what we need. And before the war started, I was with the Prime Minister flying over the huge titanium mines, and I have seen a lot of projects in Ukraine, which really could be extremely compatible with what we need in Europe. I was signing 2 weeks ago the MOU with Greenland, and when I was in Kazakhstan, it was the same the MOU signature with Kazakhstan, and it also has very practical follow-up. We organized the Europe Kazakh special day during the critical raw materials week here in Brussels, because I know that what is very important is to move from the level of, let's say, political declarations to the contractual relationship and to the concrete projects. And then of course we know that this is still not enough. And currently the heavy work is going in Germany and France. They're setting up their own funds for investment into the critical raw materials, and we are also working with EIB and EBRD what needs to be done. And I believe that now the new president of the EIB, Nadia Calvino, that she's fully aware of the importance of critical raw materials, and will be looking for the way how to help this project lift off. What is of course key, you're absolutely right, at first to know what are our priorities, what are our projects, where we are going to start. Second, permitting. So what is in our Critical Raw Materials Act is that we should use also the Institute of Overriding Public Interest. We should offer the project promoters one-stop shops for helping with all the paperwork permitting, but also for developing what is the big issue all over the European Union, even in the biggest member state, administrative capacities for permitting handling. Because if it's somewhere in a small regional office, and there are two ladies who have to decide about let's say the huge projects in the realm of billions of euros, sometimes it's overwhelming. And therefore, what we are pleading for is with the governments, that if they are talking about the strategic European projects, that they have to have a bit different treatment than, let's say, permit for the family house somewhere in the countryside. That this is like big issue which deserves so political and economic attention. Third issue very clearly would be the funding and financing, and there, as I said, we are looking for the funds we can mobilize from the EU. But what I know is the most important is to kind of show to the financial institution that these business promoters have eventual offtake agreement. So if I'm going to dig lithium, who is going to buy it for me? Am I able to process it? I mean, do I have a business case? Because that makes, of course, all the project funding much easier. And here we can help a lot with the risking of these projects, with counter guarantees, and this would be the role of the Commission, and of course EIB and EBRD. So these are, I would say, the steps which we would like to undertake. And I think that for this we have lots of understanding and support also among the member states. We are talking very intensively to the most important project promoters, because we want to help them. We want to help them to navigate through EU institutions, through some kind of also one-stop shop here, so they know to whom to talk and how to help them with all kind of applications and networking, but also to help them with the member states and to talk with the respective governments, who is the contact point, who will look after these projects, because we are under the time pressure. I mean, to open the mind and start to operating it, it takes years. I mean, if you are super successful between 4 to 7 years, so it's not something which will happen tomorrow. And then our big challenge in Europe is not only to get hold of critical raw materials, but we have to be able to process it here. So even if we would, let's say, get the lithium, we still would have to ship it over to China or Chile for processing. So we have to work on extraction, but also on processing, refining all these critical raw materials. So we would break these, I would say, dependencies on the critical materials which we need in Europe.
Thank you. Very, very, very good point about the need for financing and to act fast, also to get these projects off the ground in next few years. And yeah, surely Nadia Calvino at the EIB and her staff will have a lot of work on their hands. We're closing to an end. We've got 4 minutes left, so I'm going to give the opportunity to Rika, then Andres to add to what Mr. Šefčovič has just said, and then I'll try and wrap up. Ambassador Semmerkini.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think this discussion was extremely helpful in going into detail why exactly we need to focus on Europe's energy security in the future and how we have to tackle those challenges that are lying ahead of us. I think we have a very clear message of focusing on first, completing that infrastructure that is necessary for managing the current challenges, but also to kind of as an approach to think regionally, think European, and think strategically in all of the challenges that are ahead of us. And I think this is our mission that will really guide, will have to guide the decisions that we're facing, also including the discussions that are going on today in Brussels.
Thank you, and Ambassador Peebles, the concluding words on why energy security is critical and why it affects everyday Europeans also.
Well, we clearly understand that energy is not the basis of our life. Definitely, our perceptions, our values is the basis. But without safe, affordable, and sustainable energy supply, our values, our way of life is under threat. So that's why we need to take this energy. It's not technical thing. It's really at the basis that guarantee our way of life. And I think that's why the mission is there and we really need to succeed in it.
Thank you very much. I could not have said it better, and that's definitely what we'll be working for at EIES. Working to developing concrete policies that can gather the support of Europeans across the board. Again, not just within the EU, but also with global allies. Thank you very much to our panelists for joining us today, to EVP Šefčovič, Ambassador Semmerkini, and Ambassador Peebles. Thank you also very much to our core team for all the work that went into this launch, Isa, Peter, Ulf, but also core, our leadership council, and all those who've made this possible. Don't hesitate to get in touch with myself and the team to learn more. And yeah, I hope to see you all soon in 2024. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.